It started when I moved into my new place in Columbus, Ohio. I had found the apartment online, cheap, older building, utilities included, and though the photos looked a bit worn, it seemed fine for one person. The landlord, an older man named Richard, met me out front when I arrived. He was polite but strange, avoiding eye contact, answering questions vaguely. The building itself was 3 stories, built sometime in the 1940s, with faded red brick and ivy creeping up the sides. My apartment was on the top floor. The hallway smelled faintly of old wood and mildew, and the light fixtures buzzed quietly overhead. The door to my unit was painted a dull green, with the number 3B barely visible. Inside it was small but manageable. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that opened to a living area, and a bathroom tucked in the corner. I noticed immediately that it was cold, unnaturally so, despite the fact it was early summer. Richard told me that the previous tenant had moved out abruptly, leaving most of his stuff behind. I didn't think much of it until I opened the closet in the bedroom. It was still full, shirts hanging neatly, a pair of work boots on the floor, and an old flannel jacket draped over a box. The sight unsettled me. I asked Richard when the guy had left, and he said, "Last winter," but the way he said it made me wonder if even he wasn't sure. That night I couldn't sleep. The pipes creaked occasionally, and the wind outside made a faint whistling sound through the window. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, heavy, deliberate. They stopped outside my door. I froze, waiting, holding my breath. A minute passed, then faintly 3 knocks. I didn't move. My first thought was that it was someone from the building, maybe drunk or lost, but no one spoke. The knocking came again, softer this time. I finally got the courage to ask, "Who is it?" No response. Just silence. I looked through the peephole, but the hallway light was flickering, making it hard to see. For a split second, I thought I saw someone standing there, a tall figure, head tilted slightly to one side. But when the light steadied, it was gone. The next morning, I told myself I had imagined it, moving stress, unfamiliar sounds, all that. But when I checked the hallway floor, I noticed something odd, muddy footprints leading away from my door, faint and smeared, like someone had walked barefoot. Days passed. The apartment felt wrong, as if someone was always just out of sight. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, especially near the closet. I started hearing noises late at night, faint shuffling from the bedroom, like someone moving around. Once I woke to the sound of my closet door creaking open. I lay there, paralyzed, eyes wide in the dark, listening to soft breathing that wasn't mine. The next morning, the closet door was slightly ajar, and the jacket that had been draped over the box was now hanging neatly on the rack. I decided to ask Richard if he had a spare key or if maintenance had been in. He shook his head immediately. "No one goes in without notice," he said. I told him about the noises, the closet, the knocking. His face went pale. "You might want to move," he muttered under his breath. When I pressed him, he only said, "Some people don't leave that apartment right." That night, I called a friend to stay over. His name was Josh, and he laughed off the whole thing, calling it a bad case of spooky brain. We ordered pizza, watched a movie, tried to make light of it. Around midnight, we heard footsteps again, this time inside the apartment. Slow, dragging steps coming from the bedroom. Josh turned the TV off. "Is that your upstairs neighbor?" he whispered. I shook my head. There was no apartment above me. We both stared down the hallway, and the sound stopped. Then the bedroom light flicked on by itself. Josh grabbed a kitchen knife and we crept forward. The room was empty. Nothing moved. But then the closet door slowly, deliberately swung open. Inside was the flannel jacket, except now it was hanging perfectly centered, sleeves outstretched slightly, as if someone had just stepped out of it. The air in the room dropped to freezing. My breath came out in white puffs. Josh reached out to touch the jacket, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I whispered. A sound came from behind us, a low, wet breathing. We turned, but there was no one there. The light flickered, and for half a second I saw a shadow against the wall, tall, thin, with a head that bent at an unnatural angle. Then it was gone. Josh refused to stay another night. He left immediately, shaking his head, muttering that he didn't want to be part of whatever that was. I stayed awake until morning, sitting on the couch, lights on. The next day I called the police to report the disturbances. They sent a young officer to check it out. He walked through the apartment, looked around the closet, the windows, and finally said there was no sign of forced entry or anyone hiding inside. But as he was leaving, he paused at the door. "You said 3B?" he asked. I nodded. He hesitated, then said quietly, "You know a guy went missing from this unit about a year ago, right?" I didn't. He nodded grimly. "Name was Alan Barrett. Worked nights. Neighbors reported hearing him talking to someone in the middle of the night for weeks before he disappeared. They never found him." That night, I looked up Alan Barrett online. There wasn't much, just an old missing persons report. A photo of a man in his late 30s wearing a flannel jacket, the same one in my closet. My stomach dropped. I barely slept, too afraid to close my eyes. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again, the closet door creaking. I turned on the lamp, trembling. The door was wide open, and inside, the jacket swayed slightly, as if brushed by an unseen hand. Then, from within the darkness of the closet came a voice. Soft. Male. I never left, I screamed, bolting from the room, tripping over the rug and crashing into the hallway. The lights flickered violently. When I looked back, a figure stood just inside the bedroom doorway. It was Alan. Pale, eyes sunken, mouth open but unmoving. His head tilted to the same unnatural angle as the shadow I'd seen. He took one step forward, and the light bulb above us burst, plunging everything into darkness. I ran for the front door, fumbling with the lock, heart hammering so hard it felt like it would burst. I made it out into the hallway and didn't stop running until I reached the street. When I returned in daylight with a moving truck, the apartment door was wide open. Inside, everything was untouched, except for one thing. The jacket was gone. Richard didn't seem surprised when I told him I was leaving. "You lasted longer than most," he said quietly. I pressed him for answers, desperate to make sense of what had happened. He finally told me, "Alan lived here for 10 years. Quiet guy, worked nights, kept to himself. One winter, he started saying he could hear voices coming from the closet. Said someone was in there watching him. Then one night, neighbors heard him screaming. When they went to check, he was gone. Police searched everywhere, no sign. His clothes were all still there, except the jacket. That showed up again weeks later, hanging right where you found it. I moved out that same day, left most of my stuff behind. I didn't care. I just wanted to be gone." But the story didn't end there. 3 months later, I was living in a different state when I got a package with no return address. Inside was a folded piece of flannel, the same pattern as Alan's jacket, and a note written in shaky handwriting. "Still here." That night, I dreamed of my old apartment. I could see the closet door opening slowly and Alan standing inside, smiling, head tilted. When I woke, the smell of damp earth filled my bedroom. I threw the fabric away, but every now and then, I catch glimpses of it again, folded on a chair hanging in the corner of my closet, vanishing the moment I turn on the light. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I hear that soft, familiar breathing just behind the door and a whisper that chills me to the bone. I never left. Story the end. It was supposed to be just a temporary stay. After my divorce, I didn't have many options. My credit was ruined and my savings had run dry after paying for lawyers and moving costs. A friend from college, Rob, said he knew a place, an old farmhouse his uncle owned just outside of Springfield, Illinois. It was empty, quiet, and cheap. Too cheap. But at the time, I didn't question it. I just needed somewhere to sleep that wasn't the backseat of my car. When I first pulled up the dirt road, the house looked like something out of a forgotten photograph. Peeling white paint, a sagging porch, and tall grass swallowing the edges of the property. But it was solid, at least. There was power, running water, and a working furnace, which was more than I could say for most of the places I'd looked at. Rob handed me the keys with a half smile and said, "Don't worry about the noises. It's old wood and wind. That's all." Noises. He said it so casually that I didn't think much about it then. But by the second night, I understood what he meant. It started with faint tapping in the walls. A slow, steady rhythm that seemed to follow me from room to room. I thought maybe it was mice, but traps didn't catch anything. Then came the footsteps upstairs. Soft, deliberate, like someone walking barefoot. I'd look up at the ceiling, heart pounding, but I was the only one in the house. One night, while unpacking boxes in the kitchen, I heard whispering. Faint, almost like wind slipping through cracks, except it wasn't random. It was rhythmic. Words. I froze, straining to listen, and realized it was coming from the air vent above the sink. I climbed onto the counter, flashlight in hand, and peered inside. The metal duct was dusty, empty, but the whispering grew louder, clearer. Don't stay. I fell off the counter, scraping my arm. When I looked again, the vent was silent. I laughed nervously, told myself I was overtired, but I didn't sleep that night. A few days later, Rob called to check in. I told him about the noises, trying to sound casual, but he went quiet on the other end. Then he sighed. Yeah, the house has history. Just don't go into the cellar. It's sealed for a reason. That sentence stuck with me. The cellar door was in the kitchen floor, an old wooden hatch covered by a rug. The handle had been nailed shut, but every night after that call, I swore I could hear something underneath it. Scraping. Sometimes a knock. Once it was a voice. Muffled, like someone speaking through water. On the seventh night, the house went completely dark around midnight. The power had been steady until then, so I grabbed my flashlight and checked the breaker box. Nothing tripped. I was halfway back to bed when I heard it again. Footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate. I called out, "Who's there?" Silence. Then a low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I gripped the flashlight tighter and crept up the stairs. The hallway stretched long and narrow, the kind that always feels too dark even with lights on. My flashlight beam landed on something at the far end, a door I didn't remember seeing before. It wasn't there when I moved in. I approached it cautiously, every hair on my neck standing on end. The handle was ice cold. When I pushed it open, my light flickered and went out for half a second. When it came back, I nearly dropped it. The room was empty except for the writing on the walls. Thousands of words carved into the plaster, overlapping, etched deep as if someone had used their fingernails. Most were illegible, just gouged scratches, but a few stood out clearly. Underneath, "Don't open it. He listens." And in the center of the far wall, one sentence stood alone, deeper than the rest, gouged into the wood beneath the paint. "If you hear him knock, don't answer." I backed out of the room slowly, my breath shaking. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, the air changed. Heavy. Still. I could feel something watching. Then I heard it. 3 sharp knocks from downstairs. I froze. The sound came again. 3 knocks, loud and deliberate, echoing through the kitchen. My stomach turned to ice. I ran down the stairs, adrenaline pushing me forward. The sound came from the cellar door. Something was knocking from underneath it. For what felt like an hour, I just stood there, staring at that hatch, unable to move. Then, faintly, I heard my name. Tom. It was a woman's voice. Familiar. I dropped to my knees, pressing my ear to the wood. "Help me, Tom," it whispered again. It sounded like my ex-wife. My chest tightened. I knew it couldn't be her. She was alive, states away. But the voice, God, it sounded just like her. I whispered back, "Who are you?" Silence. Then a rasping breath and a reply that froze me in place. "You already let him out." The air went still. My flashlight dimmed, then died completely. And then something moved under the door. The wood flexed like something heavy was pressing from beneath. Nails creaked, the boards groaned. I stumbled backward as the hatch began to rise, slow and deliberate, though the nails still held. And then everything stopped. The house went silent. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car until dawn, shaking. The next morning I decided to leave, packed my things, loaded my car, but before I left, I noticed something that made me sick. Muddy footprints, bare, leading from the cellar door to the front door. I called Rob, furious, demanding to know what was wrong with that house. He sighed heavily, voice low. "You saw the room, didn't you?" "Yes," I said. "Who wrote that? What happened here?" He hesitated. My uncle, he lived there before he disappeared. Said something was trapped in the cellar. Said he heard voices, scratching, even saw someone walk out of the wall one night. After he vanished, no one would buy the place. Every tenant since has left within weeks. Some just disappeared. I drove away that morning, didn't look back. Stayed in a motel 2 towns over. But that night, as I was brushing my teeth, I heard it again, 3 knocks. Soft, deliberate, on the bathroom door. I froze, toothbrush halfway to my mouth. Then came the voice. Tom, the same one from the cellar. I opened the door slowly. Nothing was there. The mirror behind me fogged up suddenly, though the air was cold. When I wiped it clear, words were written across the glass in dripping condensation. "You let me out." I left the motel immediately. I've been running since, different towns, different states, but no matter where I go, it finds me. The knocking always returns, always 3 times. always after midnight. Sometimes it's on a wall, sometimes a window, sometimes it's from under the floor. I don't know what I released or how to stop it, but I can tell when it's close. The air turns thick, heavy, and the smell of earth fills the room like freshly dug graves. And when I close my eyes, I can see it standing in the dark, tall, hunched, face hidden behind a mess of hair and soil, arms too long, fingers dragging on the floor. It doesn't rush me. It waits, patient, watching, whispering my name just beneath the sound of the wind. I've stopped running now. I'm sitting in another rented house somewhere in Kansas typing this because I can hear it again. 3 knocks at the front door. It's closer this time. It's whispering through the keyhole now. And the worst part? It sounds like me. Story the end. It was March of 2017 when I took the job at the gas station off Route 84, just outside a small town in northern New Mexico. It was the kind of place that didn't even show up on GPS unless you zoomed in all the way. Just a lonely 2-pump station surrounded by miles of desert and a highway that seemed to stretch into nothing. The pay was awful, but I needed the work. The manager, a quiet man named Ron, handed me a single key on a chain and said, "Night shifts are easy. Just don't open the door after midnight." I thought he was joking. But he didn't smile. He didn't even look at me when he said it. The first few nights were uneventful. I'd make coffee, clean up, stock the shelves, and watch the occasional trucker pull in for gas. The desert at night was hauntingly silent, except for the wind. It wasn't long before I started to feel like I was the only person for miles. On the 5th night, a man came in around 11:45 p.m. He looked exhausted, dusty jeans, sunburned face, eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept in days. He bought cigarettes and a bottle of water, then asked me if I'd seen a white van with no plates. I told him no, and he just nodded slowly before leaving. I watched him drive off, his taillights disappearing into the black. When midnight came, I locked the door like Ron had told me. I didn't understand the rule, but it made me feel safer somehow. Around 12:30, I heard it, a faint tapping on the glass door. 3 slow taps. I looked up, expecting maybe someone had broken down, but there was no one there. The lot was empty, lit only by the buzzing fluorescent light over pump 2. I went outside anyway, shining my flashlight around. Nothing. When I came back in, the phone on the counter was ringing. I picked it up. Static. Then under it, a voice, low, strained. "You shouldn't have gone out there." I hung up. The line started ringing again immediately. I didn't answer. By 2 a.m., I was sitting behind the counter, trying to convince myself I was imagining things, when I noticed movement on the monitor. The security cameras showed the front lot, the aisles, and the back storage room. On the screen showing the front lot, there was someone standing at pump 2, tall, thin, wearing something that looked like a long coat. I couldn't see their face, just their shape, motionless under the flickering light. I stood up, heart pounding. "We're closed," I shouted through the glass. The figure didn't move, didn't even turn. Then the lights outside went out. Every single one. The monitors flickered, static washing over them for a few seconds. When they came back, the figure was gone. I checked the pumps the next morning, just after dawn. The dust around pump 2 had footprints, bare, human footprints, circling it over and over like someone had been pacing for hours. When Ron came in, I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he said quietly, "Next time, don't look at them. Don't talk to them. Just stay inside." I wanted to press him, ask who they were, but he just walked away. That night, I decided to record everything on my phone. I set it on the counter, facing the glass door. Midnight came, and I locked up. At 12:17, it started again, the tapping. 3 soft knocks on the door. I ignored it. The knocking turned into scraping, fingernails dragging slowly across the glass. I clenched my jaw and didn't move. Then came the sound of whispering. Dozens of voices, low and overlapping, like a crowd murmuring outside. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the door. The light reflected off something, pale faces. Not one, but several, pressed against the glass. Their mouths moved in unison, though I couldn't hear the words. Their skin looked gray, stretched too tight, their eyes empty. And then one of them smiled. I screamed and stumbled back. My phone fell to the floor. When I looked up again, the glass was empty. The lot outside was still. I didn't sleep that morning. I just waited for sunrise. When Ron arrived, I showed him the footage, but when I played it back, there was nothing. The video cut out right at 12:15, then came back at 12:30. He looked at me, sighed, and said, "You should probably quit." I didn't quit, though. I needed the money. 2 nights later, I noticed something new. Handprints on the glass door. Dozens of them. Some small, some large, all smeared and greasy. I wiped them off before opening, but by midnight, they were back. That night, the tapping came again. But this time, it wasn't on the glass. It was on the roof. I could hear slow footsteps pacing overhead. I called Ron, but the call wouldn't go through. The line just buzzed. Then the lights went out again. All of them. Total darkness. I turned on my flashlight, shaking. The beam caught something dripping down the wall, dark, thick, and wet. I thought it was oil until the smell hit me. Coppery, metallic, blood. Something slammed against the door. Hard. I dropped the flashlight and it rolled across the floor, the beam swinging wildly. For a split second, it lit up the glass door. A face was pressed against it, white eyes, a wide, jagged smile. I ran to the back room, locked myself in, and stayed there until dawn. When I came out, the front door was open. My flashlight was gone. So was the mop bucket. The floor was dry. No blood. I told Ron I was done. He didn't argue. He just nodded, slid an envelope across the counter, and said, "You lasted longer than most." A few days later, I got curious. I went online and searched for the station's address. Nothing. No business listing, no records. It was like it didn't exist. I even tried driving back out there, but where the road should have been, there was just open desert. No pumps, no sign, no building. And yet last night, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, there was a pause, then a man's voice, the same deep, strained voice from that first night. "You shouldn't have left." Story the end. It was early spring of 2018 when I moved into a small rental house in Southern Oregon. I had just gone through a breakup, needed a change, and the price for the place was too good to pass up. It sat about 5 miles outside of town, tucked behind a grove of pine trees, with a gravel driveway and a small sagging porch. The landlord, an older man named Harris, barely looked at me during the signing. All he said in this dry, almost warning tone was, "Don't go into the basement. It's sealed for a reason." I laughed at the time, thinking it was just some weird old man superstition. Every rental has its quirks, right? I should have listened. The house was small but cozy, wood floors, old radiators, a single bedroom upstairs, and a smell that never quite went away, something musty, like wet concrete. It wasn't terrible, just noticeable. The first night I stayed there, I noticed that the floors creaked differently, depending on where I walked. In one corner of the living room, the boards sounded hollow. When I knelt down and pressed my ear to the floor, I could swear I heard a faint humming underneath, like machinery far below ground. There was no door to a basement that I could see, just smooth wall paneling, but Harris's words about it being sealed stuck in my head. By the end of my first week, I started hearing things at night. At first, it was faint, knocks, always 3 in a row, coming from beneath the floorboards. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was old plumbing or air in the pipes, but it kept happening every night around 2:30 a.m., always 3 knocks, followed by silence. The night of March 15th, I decided to stay awake. I sat in the living room with a cup of coffee, lights dimmed, waiting. At exactly 2:31, it happened again. 3 slow knocks, deep and deliberate. I froze. It was too rhythmic, too intentional to be random. I whispered, "Hello," feeling ridiculous, but the knocks stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, from the floor, I heard a voice. It was faint, muffled, but real. A woman's voice. "Let me out." I shot to my feet, heart slamming against my ribs. The sound had come from directly beneath me. I stumbled backward, staring at the floor. The boards were still, but I could feel vibration, like something was pressing up from below. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I went outside to look around the foundation. There was no visible basement entrance, no windows, nothing but dirt and concrete. But behind the house, near where the ground dipped slightly, I noticed a patch of earth that looked disturbed, like it had been recently filled in. I asked Harris about it later that day. He looked up from his paperwork with this blank, almost annoyed expression. "You didn't go digging around, did you?" "No," I said quickly, "but what's under there? You said the basement was sealed." He sighed. "There's nothing down there anymore. Some things are better left closed off." That night, the knocking returned, louder this time, more frantic. 3 knocks, pause, then 3 more. And the voice, "Please, it's so cold." My blood went ice. I grabbed my flashlight and pounded on the floor. "Who are you?" I shouted. No response, just silence. Then, slowly, faint humming again, the same low mechanical sound I'd heard the first night. Over the next week, things got worse. Objects moved overnight. My shoes, which I left by the door, would be neatly placed by the middle of the living room every morning. The air smelled metallic, like rust or blood. One night I woke to the sound of someone crying softly beneath the floor. I pressed my ear down and heard words between sobs, fragmented, almost childlike. "He locked me in, please." The next morning, I ripped up the rug in the living room and found a seam between the floorboards that looked unnatural, like someone had tried to cover a hatch. The boards there were newer, different wood. My curiosity overrode my fear. I got a crowbar and started prying. It took me over an hour, but I finally managed to pull up enough boards to reveal a rusted metal hatch. It had a padlock, long corroded and broken, like someone had tried to weld it shut years ago. The smell that came out was horrendous, rot, mold, something sickly sweet underneath. I gagged but forced myself to lift the hatch. A staircase led down into darkness. The air that wafted up was cold, damp, and unnatural. I hesitated only a second before climbing down with my flashlight. The basement wasn't what I expected. It was large, much larger than the footprint of the house above. The walls were concrete, cracked and stained with dark streaks. And along the far wall, there were chains, 6 of them, thick, rusted, bolted into the concrete. But what froze me in place was the writing. Scrawled all over the walls in what looked like dried brown paint, or maybe something worse, were words. Over and over again, "Don't open the door." I turned to go back up, but then I heard it, the soft sound of breathing behind me. I spun around, shining my light. For a split second, I saw her. A woman standing in the corner, her hair matted, her skin pale like ash, eyes wide and black. She moved toward me, fast and jerky, like something not quite human. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the hatch shut and nailing the boards back down with shaking hands. I called Harris the next morning, furious, demanding answers. He showed up that afternoon, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When I told him what I'd seen, he didn't act surprised, just sad. "I told you not to go down there," he said quietly. "There was a tenant before you. She lived alone, like you, started hearing things, said there was someone trapped below. We sealed it after what happened." "What happened?" I asked. He hesitated. "She went down there one night, never came back up. The police searched for days but found nothing. No body, no signs of struggle, just her voice recordings on her phone, asking someone named Tom to let her out." He left shortly after, refusing to stay past dusk. That night, the knocks came back, louder than ever. My bed shook. The floorboards groaned. Then the voice came again, clear this time, right beneath me. "You shouldn't have opened it." The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath. My phone flickered and died. The sound of footsteps moved slowly across the floor below me, pacing, deliberate. I stood frozen in my bed, staring at the floor, until the footsteps stopped directly under me. And then, 3 knocks. I moved out the next morning, leaving nearly everything behind. Harris didn't even ask why. He just gave a small nod, like he already knew. A few weeks later, I checked the local news out of morbid curiosity. A brief story mentioned a fire at the property. An accident, they said. The whole house had burned down. The official report claimed faulty wiring. But the final line caught my eye. Investigators discovered an old basement beneath the structure. In it, they found multiple sets of human remains, one of which matched a woman who went missing in 2014. Further excavation is ongoing. I closed my laptop and tried to forget, but sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear 3 faint knocks in the floor beneath my apartment. Story the end. It started with a wrong turn. Mark and Lisa were newlyweds, driving cross-country from Ohio to California for a fresh start. The trip had been perfect. Music, gas station snacks, laughter echoing down open highways. But by the 3rd night, fatigue set in. The GPS glitched as they crossed into rural Kansas, rerouting them onto narrow backroads surrounded by endless fields. No lights, no houses, just empty land and a sky so dark it seemed to swallow their headlights. "Are you sure this is right?" Lisa asked, squinting at the screen. Mark frowned. "It's what the GPS says. Maybe it's a shortcut." The road narrowed until it became a single lane of cracked asphalt. The air felt heavy. Even with the windows up, Lisa thought she heard something faint, the distant echo of children laughing. Probably a radio signal, Mark said when she mentioned it, though the radio was off. An hour later, the fuel gauge dipped near empty. They hadn't seen a gas station in miles or any signs of civilization. Then, suddenly, headlights appeared in the distance, an old rusted pickup truck coming from the opposite direction. It slowed as it passed them, and Lisa caught a glimpse of the driver, an older man with a blank, expressionless face, eyes glassy, staring straight ahead. Then the truck's brake lights flicked on. It turned around. "Mark," Lisa whispered. "He's following us." Mark pressed harder on the gas. The narrow road twisted through cornfields, no turns, no exits. The truck's headlights grew brighter behind them, close enough that Lisa could see the cracked windshield, the dented hood. Then the truck's horn blared, a long, low sound that didn't stop. "Just keep driving," Lisa said, gripping Mark's arm. The horn grew louder. Then, without warning, the truck vanished. Its lights cut out as if someone had flipped a switch. Mark slowed the car, heart pounding. Where the hell did he go? They kept driving, shaken, until they saw a sign ahead, rest stop, 1 mile. Relieved, they pulled in. The rest area was small, just 2 vending machines, a picnic table, and a single flickering streetlight. Not another car in sight. Lisa got out first to stretch. The night was eerily still, the only sound the rustling of dry corn in the wind. Then, from the darkness beyond the light, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, crunching, approaching. "Mark," she whispered. He stepped out beside her. "Hello?" He called into the night. No answer, but the footsteps stopped. Lisa turned toward the cornfield and froze. There was someone standing just inside the rows. A tall figure, motionless, face hidden in shadow. "Hey!" Mark shouted, stepping forward. "You need help?" The figure didn't move. Then it tilted its head slowly, unnaturally, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. Lisa grabbed Mark's arm. "Get in the car. Now." They backed away. The figure stepped forward into the light. It was the old man from the truck, but his eyes were wrong. They were all black, no whites. Just endless darkness. They jumped in the car and sped off, gravel spitting under the tires. The rest stop vanished behind them, swallowed by the night. Neither spoke for several minutes. The GPS recalculated again, directing them down another road that didn't appear on any map. By now, the fuel gauge was nearly empty. The car sputtered. Just ahead, they saw a light. A gas station, small and isolated, glowing faintly against the black horizon. The sign read, "Martin Service, open 24 hours. Relieved, they pulled in. But something was off. The station looked frozen in time, like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. The pumps were old metal levers. Inside, a dim light flickered. A man appeared behind the counter, smiling too wide. "Evenin'. You folks lost?" "Yeah," Mark said, forcing a laugh. "We took a wrong turn right here. Just need some gas." "Of course," the man said. "You're welcome here." Lisa noticed the man's hands were filthy, blackened with grease, or something darker. He didn't move as Mark filled the tank. She turned to glance out the window and froze. In the reflection of the glass behind the man was a second face, pale, eyeless grinning. She blinked, and it was gone. "Mark," she whispered, "let's go." But when they stepped outside, the world had changed. The road was gone. Behind them, the cornfields were dead. Brown, skeletal stalks swaying in a wind that smelled like rot. "Where's the road?" Mark whispered. The man from the station was standing outside now, though neither had seen him move. He pointed toward the field. "You should have stayed on the main highway." Lisa backed toward the car. The man's smile widened, cracking his face unnaturally. "Once you leave the path, you belong to them now." "Who?" she demanded. He tilted his head toward the corn. "The ones who live between the rows." The field rustled violently, though there was no wind. Dozens of shapes began to emerge from the corn, thin, elongated figures with hollow eyes and open mouths. Mark turned the key. The engine roared. He hit the gas, tires screeching. The figures moved closer, their movements jerky, unnatural. One slammed its hand against the window, skin gray, veins black. They sped through the dead field, headlights cutting across endless rows. Behind them, the gas station light flickered and went dark. After what felt like hours, they burst out onto a paved highway again. The car was nearly out of fuel. They pulled over, both shaking, crying, trying to breathe. When dawn finally broke, the road signs made no sense. They were rusted, unreadable, written in a language neither recognized. Mark checked his phone, no signal. The GPS screen glitched again, showing a map that didn't exist. They drove for miles until they saw a small diner. The parking lot was full of cars from the 1970s. Inside, everyone stopped eating when they entered. Every head turned, every face blank, eyes dull and lifeless. A woman behind the counter smiled. "Welcome back," she said softly. "We've been waiting." Lisa backed away. "Mark, we need to leave." But when they turned to the door, it wasn't there anymore, just a blank wall where it had been. The woman smiled wider. "You shouldn't have left the road." No one ever saw Mark or Lisa again. Their car was found weeks later on a dirt path that didn't appear on any map. The engine was running. The doors were open, but the seats were covered in ash and the interior smelled faintly of burnt corn. Locals say that sometimes on foggy nights, drivers who wander too far off the highway see an old gas station appear in the distance, its sign flickering, its pumps rusted and empty, and if they stop for gas, they never leave. Story the end. It was late October when I took the night job at the gas station just outside of Flagstaff, Arizona. I just lost my apartment and needed money fast, and the place was desperate for employees willing to work the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. The manager, a guy named Dennis, hired me on the spot. He warned me that the station got strange customers sometimes, mostly drifters or truckers passing through, but told me to keep my head down and lock the doors after midnight. The first few nights were uneventful. The gas station sat at the edge of the desert, where the road stretched flat and empty for miles. The hum of the coolers, the occasional car pulling in, and the flicker of fluorescent lights were the only things that broke the silence. But by the fourth night, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. Around 2:30 a.m., I was restocking shelves when I saw a man standing by pump number 3. He was staring straight into the store, not moving, his face half lit by the overhead light. I waited for him to come inside or drive off, but he just stood there. After a few minutes, I stepped out to ask if he needed help. The second I opened the door, he was gone. Not walking away. Gone. Vanished. The pump was still on, hose hanging, handle swaying slightly. I went back inside and checked the security cameras. The footage showed him standing there for a few seconds, then flickering like bad reception before disappearing altogether. No car. No movement. I mentioned it to Dennis the next morning, but he brushed it off. "You've been staring at those monitors too long. People out here do weird stuff, especially at night." The next shift, I brought a thermos of coffee and kept the lights brighter, trying not to overthink it. Around 3 a.m., I heard a sound, 3 slow knocks from the glass door at the front. I looked up. No one was there. I went outside to check, and as soon as I did, the door shut behind me, locking itself. The desert air was still, silent. The highway stretched into darkness in both directions. Then, faintly, I heard it, a man whispering something. The voice came from behind the dumpsters near the edge of the lot. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound confident. No response. Just a dry, rattling noise like someone breathing through dust. I took a few cautious steps forward. The light from the station barely reached that far, and the shadows between the dumpsters looked too deep, almost liquid. I could feel something there, watching. Then I heard it again, closer this time. "Don't let them in." I turned and ran back toward the store. The door, which had been locked, opened easily this time, the bell jingling softly. I slammed it behind me and locked it again. My hands were shaking so badly I spilled half my coffee. The rest of the shift was quiet, too quiet. The next day I checked the footage again. At 3:02 a.m., the camera outside showed me stepping toward the dumpsters. Behind me, on the edge of the frame, was a dark shape, human-sized, but wrong. It looked like it was crawling upright, its limbs bending in ways that didn't make sense. And when I turned to run, it stood completely still, facing the camera. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was grinning. I told Dennis I wanted the day shift. He laughed, said it wasn't possible, and told me not to worry about shadow tricks. That night, I thought about quitting altogether, but I needed the money. On my 6th night, a trucker pulled in just after midnight. Big guy, grizzled, eyes bloodshot from long hours on the road. He bought a coffee and some jerky, then lingered at the counter. "You ever see it out there?" he asked. I froze. "See what?" He sipped his coffee. "The thing that watches from the dark. They say it started after they built this place over the old highway. Used to be a wreck here. Whole family burned up in their car. Folks driving past at night see him walking in the road. I forced a nervous laugh, trying not to let on how much his words bothered me. He didn't laugh back. He just stared at me for a long second before saying, "Keep the doors locked after 3." I didn't ask him how he knew. That night, I did as he said. I kept every door locked, every light on. The hours dragged, my eyes burning from fatigue. Around 2:55 a.m., the power flickered. For a moment, the lights went out completely. When they came back, everything looked the same, except for one thing. Someone was standing in aisle 4, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a charred leather jacket. Their head tilted to the side, face blackened like it had been burned. I couldn't move. The air around me felt heavy, suffocating. They began to walk toward the counter, that's slow and jerky, each step scraping against the tile. I stumbled backward, reaching for the phone, but the line was dead. When I looked up again, they were gone. I thought maybe I was losing my mind until I noticed the smell. Burned rubber and smoke. It lingered for hours, even after sunrise. I told Dennis again that I was done, that something was wrong with that place. He looked uneasy, but didn't stop me from leaving. As I was clocking out, he said, "You're not the first to quit mid-shift. Just don't drive that highway after dark. People who do, they don't always make it back." I packed my things that afternoon and got in my car. I drove east, avoiding the desert highway entirely. I thought I was safe. 2 nights later, I was staying at a small motel off Route 66 when I heard the same 3 knocks on my door. Slow. Steady. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. The parking lot was empty, except for my car. Then, faintly, I saw movement at the far edge of the lot. A figure, tall and thin, walking toward me, the same uneven gait I'd seen on the cameras. I backed away from the door, heart pounding, and grabbed my phone. No signal. The power in the room flickered, the lights dimming to a dull orange glow. The knocking started again, harder this time. I yelled, "Who's there?" A voice, muffled through the door, answered, "Don't let them in." The same words I'd heard behind the dumpsters. Then, silence. I stayed awake until morning, terrified to move. When I finally opened the door, there were 3 perfect black handprints on the wood. Burn marks, as if someone had pressed their palms there with impossible heat. I checked out immediately, drove straight to a friend's house in New Mexico, and swore I'd never take another night job again. But a few days later, when I checked my phone, I found something that made my blood run cold. The security app from the gas station had sent me a motion alert. The footage showed pump number 3 again. The same burned figure stood there, facing the camera, unmoving. Then, after a few seconds, it raised its hand, blackened, skeletal, and waved. The timestamp read 3:02 a.m. the night after I'd quit. Dennis called me a week later. His voice was shaking. "You didn't tell anyone where you went, right?" he asked. "No," I said. "There's something on the tapes," he whispered. "It's standing behind the counter, in your spot." I hung up, blocked the number, and never answered again. Even now, months later, I wake in the middle of the night to the faint sound of 3 knocks, always at the same time. 3:02 a.m. I don't open the door. I don't look outside. But sometimes, when the light flickers, I catch a glimpse in the reflection of the window, tall, thin, burned, smiling. And I know it's still watching. Story the end. Late one October night, deep in the rural backroads of southern Indiana, 32-year-old Evan Harper's car broke down on a stretch of Route 19 that most locals avoided after dark. He was driving home from a late construction job when the engine began sputtering, the headlights flickered, and the car coasted to a stop. There were no houses nearby, no cell service, and the nearest gas station was over 7 miles back. The night air was cold, damp, and heavy with mist rising off the cornfields that stretched endlessly on either side. Evan popped the hood, cursing under his breath, the beam from his phone barely cutting through the darkness. He wasn't a mechanic, but even he could tell the problem was serious. Belts worn down, engine oil leaking, thick and black. He sighed and leaned back, scanning the road. No cars, just the sound of distant insects and the rustle of cornstalks swaying in the wind. After 20 minutes of waiting, he decided to walk. He knew there was an old farmhouse about a mile up the road, a relic from decades past. Maybe someone still lived there. Maybe he could use a phone. The moon was hidden behind a sheet of clouds, and the only light came from the faint reflection of his phone screen. As he walked, he felt the stillness of the night closing in. The world seemed too quiet, like something was listening. By the time he reached the house, the fog had thickened into a ghostly haze. The farmhouse looked abandoned, sagging roof, cracked windows, the faint smell of mildew and decay. But there was light, a weak yellow glow flickering in one of the windows. He hesitated at the gate, his gut screaming to turn back. Still, the thought of sleeping in his car in the middle of nowhere made him press on. The front door was unlocked. When he pushed it open, the hinges groaned in protest. The interior smelled of rot and dust, but faint traces of something else, something coppery, hung in the air. A single lamp burned dimly on a table in what had once been a living room. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, the floorboards creaked under his boots. "Hello?" he called. No response. He stepped farther in. The furniture was covered in sheets, all but one armchair in the corner. It was turned toward the window, a figure sitting in it, motionless, head slightly tilted, as if watching the fog outside. Evan froze. "Hey, I'm sorry to bother you. My car broke down. I just need to use a phone," he said, his voice trembling slightly. The figure didn't move. He took a cautious step closer. "Sir?" Then the chair slowly rotated. The figure was an old man, or what had once been one. His skin was gray and sunken, eyes pale and unfocused. His mouth hung open slightly, but no sound came out. Evan stumbled backward, the chair rocking slightly as though moved by an unseen force. He ran toward the front door, but it was shut tight. He hadn't heard it close. He twisted the knob, pulled with all his strength. Nothing. Panic set in. He turned back toward the room, and the chair was empty. The sound of dragging footsteps echoed down the hallway. Evan's heart pounded as he backed away, fumbling for his phone. The flashlight flickered, then went out entirely, plunging the house into darkness. A faint whisper came from behind him, low, rasping, almost childlike. "Why did you come?" He spun around, the beam of his half-working phone light catching something in the hallway. Long fingers curling around a doorframe, nails cracked and dark. A shadow moved, crawling along the ceiling, impossibly fast. Evan bolted toward what looked like the kitchen. He found another door and yanked it open, expecting the back porch. Instead, he saw a stairwell descending into the basement, the smell of damp earth wafting up. He could hear whispering now, not one voice but many, overlapping, growing louder. "He came back. He came back. Don't let him leave." He tried another door. It led to the same basement stairs. He swore under his breath, panic rising like bile. No matter which door he opened, they all led downward. He gripped the railing and descended, thinking maybe there was a back exit below. The deeper he went, the colder it got. The whispers became a steady hum, vibrating the air. When he reached the bottom, his foot sank slightly into mud. The basement walls were brick, damp with mold, and the air reeked of rot. There was a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, flickering. Beneath it stood a wooden table. On it lay photographs, hundreds of them, each showing the same house from different angles in different decades. But what made his blood run cold was that in every photo there was someone standing at the window, always the same silhouette, always watching. He picked one up. It was dated just last year. In the photo, through the reflection of the glass, he could see his own face. A floorboard above him creaked. Then another. Someone or something was moving upstairs. Evan's breath caught in his throat. He slowly backed into the shadows, clutching his phone. The whispering stopped, replaced by the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps coming down the basement stairs. "Who's there?" he shouted, but his voice came out shaky. The light flickered once, twice, then went out. He could hear breathing. Not his own, something else's. Shallow, rasping, wet. He backed up farther, hand pressed to the cold brick wall, when his fingers brushed against something soft. He turned the light from his phone toward it and froze. Bodies. Dozens of them. They lined the basement walls, sitting upright, their faces gray, eyes open but lifeless. Some were old, shriveled, others looked freshly dead. Each one had a faint smile carved into its face. The bulb above flickered back on, and standing in the center of the room was the old man from the chair. His eyes were open now, black and glistening. He spoke, but his lips didn't move. The voice came from everywhere. "No one leaves." Evan sprinted toward the stairs, stumbling over the floor, his flashlight flashing wildly. He reached the steps, but they stretched upward endlessly, the top no longer visible. He climbed, gasping, shouting for help, but the house shifted around him. The walls pulsed like veins. The whispers grew into screams. When he finally burst through a doorway, he was outside, or what looked like outside. The air was thick and gray, and the cornfields stretched in every direction. His car was gone. The road was gone. The farmhouse stood behind him, perfectly still, but now every window glowed faintly, shapes moving behind the glass. He began to run. He didn't care where, just away. But no matter how far he went, the house remained on the horizon, watching him. The fog followed, wrapping around his legs, his chest, his face, until he couldn't breathe. He collapsed in the field, clawing at the dirt. The last thing he heard was the sound of that humming again, distant but growing closer, and a voice whispering right in his ear, "You're home now." The next morning, a passing trucker spotted a car parked on the shoulder of Route 19, keys still in the ignition. The hood was open, the engine cold. No sign of Evan Harper. Sheriff's deputies searched the area for days, but the farmhouse he'd described in his last voicemail to his sister couldn't be found. Locals swore it had burned down in 1974. Yet sometimes on foggy nights, travelers say they see a faint light in the cornfields, flickering like a lamp in an old window. And if you stop to look long enough, you might see a man's face staring back at you through the glass, mouth stretched into a carved smile. Story the end. It was one of those late October nights where the air felt heavy, not from rain or fog, but like it carried the weight of something unseen pressing down. I was driving home from a long shift at the hospital, the kind of shift that leaves your body aching and your mind fragmented. The roads were mostly empty, and the orange glow of the streetlights flickered in sync with the wipers clearing off the faint mist that had begun to settle. I wasn't worried about anything in particular, just tired and looking forward to my small apartment in the suburbs of Louisville. I had moved here a few months earlier, seeking quiet after a decade of working in the city, thinking isolation would help me recover from the daily horrors of emergency medicine. As I turned onto a long stretch of road lined with dense trees, the headlights briefly illuminated a figure standing at the side of the road. My first thought was that it was a hitchhiker, though it was rare to see anyone at this hour out here. The figure was motionless facing me, but I could see a thin glint in the dim light, almost like metal catching the beams. My instinct told me to slow down, maybe even stop to check, but a nagging sense of unease kept my foot pressing down on the gas. I passed by, feeling the car shudder over a rough patch, and glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure had vanished. I tried to shake it off, blaming my tired mind and the shadows cast by the trees. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Do you see me?" My stomach dropped. I was alone in the car, and the signal was weak, barely showing a scent confirmation. I pulled over at the next safe spot, hands trembling slightly as I stared at the screen. There was no reply option, just that ominous message. The rational part of me, doctor, trained to analyze and compartmentalize fear, told me it was a prank. Maybe some bored kid texting numbers randomly. But another part, the part that had learned over the years to trust gut instincts, screamed that this was different. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I locked the doors and continued driving, trying to tell myself that seeing things in the dark was common when your body was exhausted. The next day at the apartment, I found myself double-checking the locks and peering through the blinds. It was a modest place on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, but the isolation that once felt peaceful now felt suffocating. My neighbors were few and far between, and I didn't know any of them personally. I spent the day avoiding outside noise, but the unease from the previous night lingered. It started subtly at first. Small things out of place. My keys moved from the hook to the counter. A chair slightly shifted. I told myself it was forgetfulness, exhaustion, or maybe a delivery person who had left something inside while I was out. But then I began noticing marks. Scratches in the wall near the bedroom door, faint but deliberate. They looked like someone had used fingernails, long, ragged scratches, not accidental. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? The logical explanation was always easier than facing the truth that something or someone was inside my home. By the third night, the noises started. Footsteps, soft at first, pacing outside my bedroom. A deliberate pause, then a shuffle like someone dragging their feet. My apartment was single-story, small, and the floors creaked occasionally, but never in patterns that made sense. Never like someone pacing deliberately just outside your door. I stopped sleeping entirely, sitting on the edge of the bed with a baseball bat across my lap, listening to the faintest movements in the shadows. Then came the calls. My phone would ring at odd hours. Unknown numbers, always the same pattern. A single ring, a click, then silence. I started screening all calls, but they became more frequent. Sometimes the voice I could faintly make out on the other end was distorted, garbled like it was breathing through a broken speaker. I began recording these calls, hoping to capture something, anything, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The recordings revealed faint whispers, at first indecipherable, but eventually I could make out a single word repeated over and over, here. One morning I woke to a note slipped under my door. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, and familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. It read, "You can't hide." I called the police. They came, took statements, and reassured me that everything seemed normal. "Probably a prank," one of the officers said. But he also glanced around the apartment with an expression I couldn't read, and it unnerved me more than his words. Days turned into a week, and the harassment escalated. My groceries were rifled through, my personal belongings moved or destroyed. Nothing was stolen, just shifted, broken, or placed somewhere conspicuous. One night, I came home to find my bed stripped completely, sheets gone, mattress flipped upside down. Nothing else in the apartment had been disturbed, just the bed, the place I felt safest. I decided to set up cameras, cheap ones from Amazon, hidden in corners. I installed 3, covering the living room, the bedroom, and the hallway. I told myself that if someone was entering, I'd catch them. I monitored the footage religiously, but every morning the memory cards were wiped clean. Not formatted, not full, just erased entirely. Then I found a message on one of the camera screens. It appeared while I was reviewing footage one morning. Written in red, bold letters across the frame of the living room, "I see you." My heart stopped and I couldn't breathe. No one had been there when I was recording. The camera itself captured nothing. The message was there when I played it back. Sleep became impossible. I started sleeping in the car, taking shifts of a few hours, never more than that. I couldn't bear the thought of being alone in that apartment. But even in the car, I wasn't safe. The calls followed, the texts continued. The message tone sounded like it was coming from inside the car itself sometimes, even when the phone was off. A week later, I woke up to the sound of my front door opening. My first thought was the police. It had to be, but the lock was intact. I crept to the door, bat ready, heart hammering in my chest. Peering through the peephole, I saw a man. Tall, dark coat, face obscured by shadows. But when I opened the door, he was gone. No footprints in the thin layer of frost outside, no sign of entry. I began documenting everything, typing it out obsessively because the thought of losing my mind terrified me more than whatever, or whoever was doing this. Then it happened. The thing I can't rationalize, the event that made me realize this wasn't a person or a prank. I woke in the middle of the night to a sound like water dripping, slow and deliberate. I thought it was my pipes until I noticed it was coming from the bathroom. The light was off. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight. The bathroom mirror was smeared with condensation, and written in it, as if someone had pressed their fingers against the fog, "I am here." I ran out of the apartment, leaving the door open behind me. The air was freezing, and the street was empty. I called a friend, begging him to come stay with me. He arrived, skeptical but concerned. That night, we stayed in the living room, doors locked, lights on. And yet, in the early hours, we heard it, slow, deliberate scratching from the bedroom ceiling. My friend froze. I told him what had happened, the texts, the calls, the messages, and even he looked like he wanted to run. The next morning, I decided to move. I packed as much as I could, but when I went into the bedroom to gather my last things, I froze. There was a figure sitting on the bed. A woman, pale, dark hair covering her face, hands dangling limply over her knees. She didn't speak. She didn't move, but I could feel her watching me. I stumbled back, heart racing, and she vanished the instant I blinked. I left everything behind, apartment, furniture, belongings, gone. I moved across state lines to Ohio. I changed my number, blocked unknown numbers, even installed new security systems. For months, I thought I was free. And for a while I was. But one night, a year later, I received a package, no return address, just a small box. Inside was a single broken mirror shard. On it, scratched deeply, were the words, "Home is where I see you." I don't sleep in a house anymore. I live in motels, one night at a time, always looking over my shoulder. I've tried to tell people, but the disbelief is suffocating. Friends have stopped answering my calls, therapists shrug, and the police can't do anything when there's no physical evidence. But I know. I know it's real, and I know it's patient. It waits, watching, learning, and it knows where I am. Every so often, when the room is dark, I see a shadow in the corner, just for a moment, just a fleeting glimpse. And I know the thing that haunted me in Louisville never really left. It follows, always patient, always hungry for that moment when I finally let my guard down. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the phone buzz, unknown number. I don't answer. I don't even look, but deep down, I know the next message is coming, and I know it will be worse. It doesn't matter how far I run, it doesn't matter how much I hide, somewhere out there in the shadows, it watches, and I am powerless. Story, the end. It started on a cold, gray November evening in a small town in upstate New York, a town that seemed perpetually stuck between late autumn and early winter. I had just moved into a rental house on the outskirts of town, something I convinced myself was perfect. Quiet, secluded, a little cheaper than anything in the center. The previous tenant had left abruptly, and the landlord was cagey about why, but in my rush to escape the city, I didn't push for details. It wasn't until the second night that I began to notice the small things. The creaks that didn't sound like old wood, the faint smell of something like burnt hair mixed with dampness, the feeling that the air shifted whenever I crossed certain thresholds in the house. I was a graduate student at the time, spending long hours at the library, but I still worked from home on assignments that required quiet. The first week passed with only mild unease. I told myself it was just the adjustment to a new place. But then came the first night I couldn't sleep. I woke around 3 a.m. to the sound of soft whispering, like someone was speaking in the corner of my room. At first I thought it was a dream, but then I heard it clearly, my name, drawn out, like someone was testing it on their tongue. I froze, listening. It stopped. My apartment was still. I told myself it was stress. I eventually fell asleep, though fitfully. Over the next few days, the occurrences became harder to ignore. Objects in my apartment seemed to move subtly. A pair of scissors on the kitchen counter would be somewhere else in the room when I returned. My favorite mug would appear on the table upside down, though I was certain I hadn't touched it. I began recording audio at night with my phone, rationalizing that I'd catch something explainable. Rats, wind through the old windows, a neighbor in the yard. What I found the next morning chilled me. Faint whispers just below the threshold of intelligibility, sometimes my name, sometimes just laughter. It wasn't consistent, but it was there. And it wasn't static. The tone, the cadence, it felt deliberate, like someone was hiding just beyond the microphone. I tried to ignore it, but I started to dread returning home. The most disturbing thing happened one night after a long day at the library. I had stayed late working on a paper and got home around 10 p.m. The house felt wrong, too quiet. Even the hum of the refrigerator sounded like it was holding its breath. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A figure just standing at the end of the hallway, back to me. I froze. It was a man, I think, but I couldn't be sure. He didn't move. I blinked and he was gone. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the light, exhaustion, but the sense of being watched followed me everywhere. The next morning, I found muddy footprints across the kitchen floor. Not just small smudges or the dirt I tracked in. It was like someone had walked across it in boots. There was no mud outside. I lived in a rural area, but my yard had been blanketed in frost overnight. The landlord was unreachable by phone. Neighbors were polite but unhelpful, shrugging when I asked if anyone else had seen anything. They seemed to avoid the topic, like even mentioning it was dangerous. I bought cameras and motion sensors thinking I could finally catch something. That night, I fell asleep with the monitors running. Around 2:37 a.m., the motion sensors triggered. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, watching the live feed. The hallway was empty. Then the camera feed flickered, and a man appeared standing near my bedroom doorway, perfectly still, facing the camera. He didn't move, didn't breathe, or at least nothing on the feed suggested life. Then in a blink, he was gone. The motion sensor was still off, the hallway empty. I screamed, unplugged everything, and called the police. They arrived within 20 minutes, polite but skeptical, finding no sign of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence at all. They left, shaking their heads, suggesting stress and sleep deprivation. I didn't sleep that night. Things escalated. Objects started appearing in my room. Notes written in pencil, scrawled in a shaky, illegible hand. At first, I assumed a prank, but there was no way anyone could have entered the house without leaving signs. Doors were locked, windows were sealed. The notes were unsettling, just random words: leave, they're watching, don't sleep. Then my name appeared, Michael. My blood ran cold. I don't know why I wrote Michael. I'm not even sure why I thought that was my name in the note. I'd never written or spoken it before, seeing it there. I tore up the paper, flushed it, tried to convince myself I was imagining it. One night, I woke to the sound of someone breathing heavily in my bedroom. I shot up in bed, the air thick and cold. My phone was on the nightstand. I grabbed it, dialed 911, and pointed the flashlight toward the corner of the room. Nothing. Just the shadows stretching across the walls. Then I saw it. A handprint. Huge, pressed into the frost forming on the window pane, right next to my bed. I opened the window. It was empty outside, no footprints, no snow disturbed. I called the police again. They came and again found nothing. They suggested I get a mental health evaluation. I refused. Sleep became impossible. I started keeping a small backpack by the door, ready to run, ready to leave at any moment. The whispering grew more coherent over time. At first it was just faint muttering, then clear sentences. You shouldn't be here. They don't like visitors. We're patient. I began hearing it in my car, in the library, over the phone. Always faint, always deliberate. Always my name. 2 weeks after I moved in, I came home to find a man sitting in my living room. Not in a chair, not on the couch. He was just there on the floor, cross-legged, staring at me. I froze. He was pale, almost translucent in the weak lamplight. No shoes, no jacket, like he had always been there. He whispered, "You can't leave." Then he was gone. The door was locked, windows shut. I checked the surveillance footage. The cameras showed static, but a shadow moving quickly across the room. Nothing else. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I decided to leave the house to finally escape. I packed quickly, everything I owned into my car, ignoring the whispers that followed me into the garage. As I drove off, I glanced in the rearview mirror. At the top of the driveway on the porch stood a man. He waved. I screamed. He didn't move when I hit the gas. He stayed there, waving until I was out of sight. I didn't stop driving for 3 days, only pausing for gas, always checking my mirrors, always feeling eyes on me. I found a cheap motel, a week away from the town, in a city that was bright, loud, and filled with strangers. I told no one about what happened. I started seeing doctors, therapists, sleep specialists. They all suggested hallucinations, extreme stress, exhaustion, but I knew what I had seen. I knew what had touched the doorknobs, moved objects, whispered my name. No one believed me, and over time I began to fear that maybe it was true. I had imagined all of it. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. Something had been in that house, something that waited, something that would follow. 2 months later, I returned to the town for paperwork related to the lease. I drove past my old house. Everything looked normal. The grass was frosted over, the windows dark. But then I saw him, standing at the edge of the yard, barely visible in the dim afternoon light, the same pale, translucent figure. He wasn't waving this time. He was just standing, staring directly at me, and I realized, with a dread that froze my blood, that he had been waiting for me to come back, waiting for me to leave. Waiting, probably, to follow the next person who dared to move in. I never returned to that town again. But every now and then, when I'm driving at night, alone in quiet areas, I see glimpses of a figure standing on the side of the road. Just standing, watching, waiting. And I know, in the marrow of my bones, that it's the same one. Waiting is what it does best. Months after all this, I found a local news article buried in the online archives. It mentioned the previous tenant of the house I rented. They had disappeared without a trace. No calls, no sightings, nothing. The police never solved the case. The landlord claimed ignorance. Nothing was ever explained. I realized then that the stories, the whispers, the moving objects, and the man in the hallway were part of a pattern. The house wasn't haunted. It was a trap. It didn't just scare. It waited. It consumed, it followed, and it didn't stop at the house. It followed you wherever you went. I moved several times after that, but no matter where I went, the feeling never left. It wasn't just fear, it was presence. Watching, waiting, always waiting. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night and there would be a shadow at the foot of my bed and the faint whispering would return. Not just in the house, but in my car, at the library, over the phone, wherever I went, the sense of being hunted, being watched, being followed, never left. And then I realized, too late, that running doesn't work. You can move across states, across cities, across the country, but once something decides you belong to it, it doesn't let go. It only waits. And sometimes when you least expect it, it comes to remind you. A few months ago, I was walking home from work late at night in a quiet suburb of Pennsylvania. The streets were empty, the air crisp. I saw a figure across the street, standing perfectly still, watching me. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. Then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, across the road, towards me. Pale, faceless, silent. My phone was in my hand. I called 911, but there was no dial tone. I ran. I didn't stop until I was in my apartment. The door was locked, but I swear I felt something press against the other side, just beyond the door. I thought I was safe. I wasn't, and now I know I never will be. Wherever I go, whatever I do, it's there. Watching, waiting, patient. I've tried everything: therapists, medications, moving hundreds of miles away, changing my routines, changing my locks, installing alarms, cameras, lights, even staying with friends. Nothing works. Every night I hear it in the silence. Every night I see glimpses out of the corner of my eye. Every night I know it's closer than I want to admit. I have no idea what it wants or why it chose me. I only know it exists and it never stops. The police will never believe me. No one will. And it doesn't matter because I've learned that some things don't care about proof. Some things just wait. I'm telling this now because I have nowhere else to turn. I don't know how much longer I'll last before it finds me. I don't know if leaving my house, my city, or my country would matter. I don't know if it's tied to me or just drawn to my fear. I only know that the whispering is getting louder. The shadows are moving faster. And the last time I blinked, I saw it standing behind me in the reflection of my window, smiling. I didn't turn around. I can't. I know it's waiting for the moment when I let my guard down, the moment when I relax, the moment when I think I'm safe. That's all it needs. I'm writing this as a warning. If you ever feel watched, if you ever hear whispers calling your name at night, if you ever see a figure standing silently just beyond the edge of your vision, don't ignore it. Don't try to rationalize it. Don't think it's your imagination. It's real, and it's patient. And once it notices you, it doesn't forget. It doesn't leave, and you will never, ever be free from it. Story the end. It was one of those nights in late October when the wind seemed to whisper warnings, rustling through the bare trees like dry bones scraping against each other. I was driving back from a late shift at a diner in rural Pennsylvania, the kind of place where the road lights are few and far between, and the darkness feels like it could swallow you whole if you're not careful. My car, an old Honda Civic that had seen better days, hummed steadily as I followed the lonely stretch of Route 322. I had been working double shifts all week to cover rent, and my body was so tired I could feel it shaking under the wheel. I wasn't scared of the dark. I'd driven this route hundreds of times, but that night something felt off. It started subtly. The first sign was a car behind me that seemed to be keeping pace no matter how fast I went. Normally, I wouldn't have noticed, but the headlights flickered oddly, like they weren't fully on, and every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, the shape seemed slightly wrong. Bigger, wider, and it wasn't just behind me. It seemed to mirror my movements almost too perfectly. I chalked it up to exhaustion, a trick my mind was playing. But the closer I got to the stretch of road that cut through the woods, the more uneasy I became. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the trees leaned in as if they were alive, reaching across the asphalt with skeletal fingers. I tried to shake the feeling by turning on the radio, but the static was relentless. No station came through, just that high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. I tapped the knob, thinking the antenna might be loose, but the sound didn't change. Then I noticed something that made my stomach knot. There was a figure in the back seat, or at least I thought there was. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, I caught a shadow moving, tall, impossibly thin, with what looked like a dark hood over its head. My heart hammered in my chest, and I forced myself to tell myself it was a reflection, a trick of the dim dashboard lights. I blinked, and it wasn't gone. I slammed the brakes at a sharp turn, nearly losing control. The car behind me skidded to a stop as well, impossibly close, and for a moment I thought I could see its windows roll down, but there was no one inside, just that strange, unnatural darkness that seemed to crawl along the interior, swallowing the light. My phone had no signal. I tried calling my roommate, anyone, but it was just silence. The tires on the road made that high-pitched squeal that makes you wish you were anywhere else, and then the engine died. I was stranded. Middle of the woods, no moon, no headlights. Just the sound of the wind and that thing. I sat frozen, hands gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself I could start the car again. I turned the key, and for a moment the engine roared to life, but something moved in the back seat. That shadow was closer now, hunched over, and I swear I could see its eyes. Not human eyes. Hollow, black, deep as the void. I yelped, threw the door open, and bolted into the trees. I didn't stop running until I stumbled onto a service road that eventually led to a small gas station. I was bleeding from my hands and knees, the kind of raw, ragged cuts you get from running through brambles at night, and I could feel my chest heaving like I'd been running for hours. I burst into the gas station, dripping blood, panting, eyes wide. The clerk, a man in his 60s with a thick mustache, stared at me blankly. "What the hell?" I tried to explain, but it came out as a strangled gasp. He looked past me, eyes narrowing. "You saw it too, didn't you?" he asked. "What?" I croaked. "That thing in the woods," he said quietly, almost reverently. "The hooded man. Shows up around this stretch every few years. Nobody ever talks about it, and nobody who sees it makes it back right. You're lucky." I laughed, but it was hollow, unconvincing. "Lucky? I barely made it out." He shrugged, and for a moment I thought he was joking. Then he leaned in and whispered, "Most don't even survive the night. You might want to get off these roads before it finds you again." I stayed at the gas station until dawn, refusing to look out the windows. When the first light came through the grimy glass, I saw the road. Nothing was there. No sign of the car I'd been following. No sign of the woods swallowing the asphalt. Just the quiet, mundane road I had driven countless times. I left that place quickly, never stopping to question the man's words. I didn't sleep that day. I didn't sleep the next. But I convinced myself it had been a hallucination. Exhaustion, stress, rural paranoia, anything but reality. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the police. My car had been found abandoned on Route 322, the exact same stretch I had been driving. The strange thing was there were no skid marks, no sign that I had stopped, no trace of me leaving it. The interior was completely stripped, seats gone, mirrors gone, everything metal chewed into jagged edges, my wallet, my phone, my keys, gone. The strange part, though, was the blood. There were streaks inside the car, but the DNA report came back inconclusive. Nothing human. I moved after that, to another state far away where I hoped I could forget. But every time I drive at night past stretches of dark woods, I feel it. That weight in the back seat, that flicker of shadow. It's like it followed me. I know it did. Months later, I started hearing stories from people in my new town. Small towns are full of gossip, and sometimes gossip is truth. People spoke of a tall figure, cloaked and silent, appearing along lonely roads, always in October, always in Pennsylvania, always near woods that swallow the moonlight. Some say it drags people into the trees. Others say it waits until the driver is alone and exhausted, then watches until they crash or run. A few claim it speaks, but in voices that aren't human, whispering your name and laughing. I thought I was safe. I thought moving would help. But one night, after returning from a late shift at a diner here, I was on a back road not unlike the ones I'd fled. The road lights were sparse. The wind whispered through the trees, and I felt it. That oppressive, unnatural weight in my back seat. I didn't stop this time. I didn't even glance. I drove straight, eyes on the road, but I could feel it. Watching. Waiting. I took a detour the next day, drove past the woods near my old town, though I swore I would never go back. That stretch of Route 322 looked the same in daylight, harmless, but the locals avoided it in October. Avoided the woods, avoided looking too closely at the shadows. One night, my roommate here woke me up screaming. She said she saw a man standing at the edge of the driveway, hood over his head, staring at our house. I ran outside. No one there. Nothing. Just the fog rolling off the nearby creek. But I know. I know it's still out there. Watching. Waiting. I've read the forums online, the weird unsolved disappearances threads. Some of them mention Pennsylvania, some mention Route 322, some even describe the car being stripped inside, just like mine. Nobody survives a second encounter. I try to rationalize. Maybe it's an urban legend. Maybe I'm still exhausted. Maybe I imagined the figure in the back seat. But rationality has its limits when you feel the gaze of something that isn't human, that isn't alive in the way we understand life. Sometimes I wake up at night, hear the faint sound of tires on gravel and the faint static of a radio that isn't even plugged in. I can't sleep. I can't stop thinking about those black, hollow eyes. And I don't know if it will ever leave me alone. I've started carrying a knife, pepper spray, even a baseball bat. But it's not that kind of thing you can fight. It waits, patient, almost polite. It doesn't rush. It doesn't yell. It just watches, knowing that exhaustion will betray you long before you even know it's there. I drive less now, avoid roads that cut through woods, avoid October entirely if I can, but I know that no matter how far I go, it's still out there, somewhere, watching, maybe following, maybe waiting for a stretch of road late at night when the headlights flicker just a little too much. Last week, I was at a gas station on a rural highway, the kind where the air smells like diesel and dead leaves. I saw someone at the pump. Tall, thin, hood over their head, standing completely still. I wanted to call out, but something stopped me. My stomach turned. The hairs on my arms stood on end. And when I looked closer, I realized there was no face, just an endless black void. The kind you see in your nightmares when you're too tired to wake up. I left without filling my tank. I didn't even look back. I'm writing this now because I don't know what else to do. People need to know. If you drive at night in rural Pennsylvania, if you're tired, if you feel something in the back seat, don't stop, don't look. And whatever you do, don't go into the woods. It's patient. It waits. And it's hungry for the kind of fear that only exhaustion and isolation can bring. I don't think I'll ever feel safe again. I don't think anyone who sees it ever does. And tonight I hear tires on gravel outside my house. Story the end. It started with a phone call. I still remember the sound of it. The shrill, insistent ringing cutting through the quiet of my small apartment in Dayton, Ohio. I had just gotten home from a late shift at the hospital, and the first thing I did was collapse onto my couch, hoping to lose myself in some mindless TV. The call, though, made me freeze. The number was unknown, and something about the silence on the other end made my stomach twist. When I finally answered, there was only breathing. Slow, measured, deliberate breathing that seemed almost too loud. I laughed nervously, assuming it was a prank, and hung up. I didn't think much of it at first. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old building, every whisper of wind against my window made my heart skip a beat. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, a knock at my door. Soft, hesitant. I told myself it was probably the maintenance guy or a neighbor, but the building was nearly empty at this hour. I peeked through the peephole. No one, just the dark hallway stretching out, lit dimly by the flickering fluorescent lights. I shrugged it off, thinking I must be imagining things. But the next morning, I found a small, folded note slipped under my door. I don't even remember what prompted me to open it right there, but I did. In shaky handwriting, it said, "I saw you last night. You can't hide." I laughed nervously again, trying to convince myself it was a sick joke. Maybe some kid in the building, bored and looking for attention. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. But the feeling didn't leave me. The air in my apartment seemed heavier, almost suffocating, and I kept checking the locks, the windows, even under my bed, though I knew rationally there was nothing there. Then the dreams started. They were vivid, impossible. I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart hammering, with the sense of being watched. Always the same figure, standing in the corner of my bedroom, just out of reach of the dim lamp, faceless, silent. Sometimes it would move closer while I tried to scream. Sometimes it didn't. I told myself it was stress, nothing more. But the feeling followed me into the waking world. I would catch glimpses of shadows out of the corner of my eye, hear the faintest shuffle behind me when I was alone, and my apartment, my safe place, felt less like a home and more like a cage. A week after the first note, it escalated. I came home from work and found my front door unlocked. I live alone, always have. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place, except for a photo lying face down on the kitchen counter. I picked it up and froze. It was a photo of me taken through my window from outside. My face was blurry, but my posture, the way I was holding my keys, everything about it screamed that someone had been watching me. My stomach churned. I called the police. They came, took the photo, checked the apartment, and said there was no sign of forced entry. They told me to stay vigilant and left, leaving me in the quiet, suffocating tension of my own apartment. Over the next month, it only got worse. The calls became more frequent. Always breathing, always silence afterward. Sometimes when I answered, there would be whispering. Just low, unintelligible murmurs that made my skin crawl. I changed my number. They found me. Notes appeared in my mailbox. At first, I tried to throw them away. Then I stopped opening them. Then, eventually, I couldn't stop reading them. The messages were increasingly personal. I know your favorite coffee. You shouldn't eat cereal for dinner. It's bad for you. Your neighbor likes you, but I don't. I tried moving. I rented a place in a different part of the city. Different building, different street, different life. For a few days, I felt safe. But then, one night, I was lying in bed trying to sleep, and I heard it. A soft, deliberate scratching at the window. I got up, heart in my throat, and looked outside. Nothing. I exhaled, trying to calm myself, but then I noticed something in the reflection of the glass. A silhouette, standing on the other side of the street, just beyond the streetlight. Watching, waiting. I called the police again. This time, they said they'd increase patrols in my area, but they couldn't always be there, and they couldn't see what I saw in the dark when no one else was around. I started carrying a knife, a baseball bat, anything that made me feel like I had some control. But it was never enough. The fear followed me. I began noticing small changes in my apartment. Objects moved slightly, but enough to be unsettling. My keys would be on the counter instead of the hook. My shoes would be untied. My bed would be rumpled, though I had been asleep for hours. I started installing cameras, 2 in the living room, 1 in the bedroom. The footage, when I reviewed it, made my blood run cold. Shadows moved across rooms when I was at work. The bedroom camera recorded late at night, always around 3 a.m., the figure standing just at the edge of the bed, always watching, always silent. Sometimes the figure would be gone in the morning, as if it had never been there. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. My friends stopped calling. I stopped going out. Everything revolved around the apartment, around the figure, around the constant, unrelenting fear. I started hearing whispers even when the cameras didn't catch anything. My mind was unraveling, or so I thought. One night I was lying on the couch trying to watch TV when I saw it. At first I thought it was my imagination, a shadow in the corner of the living room, but it didn't disappear. It moved, slowly, deliberately, toward me. I froze. My phone was on the coffee table, just out of reach. The figure stopped a few feet away and raised its head, or what I assumed was a head. There was no face, nothing. Just a smooth, featureless surface. Then it tilted slightly as if examining me and backed away. I ran, out of the apartment, into the street. In my panic, I didn't care who saw me. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, until I couldn't run anymore. I went to a motel, anything to get away from the apartment. That night, I slept with the lights on, fully dressed, the door locked, the TV blaring. But I woke up to a note on the motel room door. I know where you are. I called the police. Again, this time they were more concerned. They suggested I stay with family or friends somewhere safe. I did. For a while, I felt some relief, but the dreams didn't stop. The figure was always there, watching, waiting. Sometimes it was closer than I thought. Sometimes it was right behind me when I woke, just before I could move. I eventually tried therapy, medication, everything they suggested. Nothing helped. The calls continued, the whispers in the dark, the notes, the moving shadows. One night, I decided to confront it. I went back to the apartment, thinking maybe if I faced it, it would stop. I don't know what I expected. An explanation, an end, some relief. But when I entered the apartment, it was empty, silent, clean, everything in its place, nothing out of order. I stayed there for hours, trying to convince myself it was over. Maybe I had been imagining it. Maybe it had just been some stalker, some sick person who had given up. Maybe. But then I noticed something. A faint outline on the living room wall, like a shadow etched into the paint, and in the center, scratched into the wall, three simple words: I never left. I left that apartment immediately, never went back. I moved to another state, changed my name, cut off all contact with anyone I had known in Dayton. For a time, it seemed like it was over. I could sleep. I could leave the house without looking over my shoulder. But the dreams persisted. Always the same, always the figure in the corner. And sometimes, just sometimes, I would hear it. A slow, deliberate breathing coming from just outside my door. I have never told anyone this story in full. Most people wouldn't believe it. They would say I'm imagining things, that I'm paranoid, that I need help. Maybe they're right. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I know the impossibility of those nights, the weight of the constant oppressive presence. And I know that no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, it hasn't stopped. Last week, I was sleeping when my phone buzzed, unknown number. I hesitated, but I answered. This time, there was no breathing, no silence, just one line of text. See you soon. And I know, in the pit of my stomach, that it's true, that it will find me again, that it's been with me all along, hiding in the corners of my life, watching, waiting, and no matter what I do, I will never be safe. Story the end. It was one of those late September evenings in Pennsylvania, the kind where the air feels sharp, almost brittle, and the leaves rustle as if whispering warnings. My name is Aaron, and I live in a small, nondescript town called Millstone, about a 3-hour drive from Philadelphia. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, or at least they think they do. The town itself was sleepy, but it had a reputation for disappearing people, like a history the locals preferred to avoid discussing. I didn't believe much in ghost stories or urban legends at the time, but that night changed everything. I had recently moved into a modest 2-story house on the edge of town, inherited from an aunt I barely remembered. It was a fixer-upper, cheap and isolated, surrounded by dense woods on 3 sides. The previous tenants had left in a hurry, leaving behind a faint smell of mildew and a collection of broken furniture. I had spent a few weeks cleaning and repairing what I could, but the place always felt off. The first strange thing happened about a week after I moved in. I was unpacking boxes in the living room when I noticed something odd about the fireplace. The hearth had been sealed shut, but there were scratches on the brick, deep and jagged, as if something had been trying to claw its way out. I assumed it was rats or maybe raccoons, though the marks were unnervingly human-like. I bought a flashlight and peered inside. It was empty, but the air felt colder than the rest of the house, and there was a faint metallic smell. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the imagination of someone new to an old house. Night came faster than I expected. I had been working late, unpacking boxes, trying to settle in. Around midnight, I heard what I first thought was footsteps upstairs. The house was empty, or so I believed. I called out, "Hello, anyone there?" But there was no answer. The sound stopped, and I went to check my bedroom, thinking maybe I had imagined it. When I stepped into the hallway, I froze. My bedroom door, which I had closed hours ago, was now wide open. I didn't remember leaving it that way. I closed it, locking it with the old, rattling latch, and tried to convince myself I was overworked and paranoid. I fell asleep eventually, though fitfully. The following week, things escalated. I started noticing small, unsettling things. Items in my kitchen were moved slightly. My keys weren't where I left them. At first, I blamed myself, thinking I was forgetful. But the next night, I woke up to the sound of someone breathing in my bedroom. I could feel it, heavy, wet breaths against the back of my neck. I sat up quickly, and the air was empty. Nothing was there. It wasn't until I found a series of drawings tucked behind a loose board in the attic that I started to feel real fear. They were crude sketches, almost childlike, but horrifying. Faces with hollow eyes, mouths twisted into screaming shapes, figures crawling across floors on all fours. Each drawing was signed with initials I didn't recognize. JH. The attic had been locked before, but I had somehow found the key among my aunt's belongings. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been living in that house before me, unseen. Weeks passed, and the occurrences became more sinister. The scratching at the fireplace returned, now accompanied by whispers. They were unintelligible at first, murmurs at the edge of hearing. One night I swore I heard a voice call my name. low and deliberate. "Aaron," it hissed. I bolted out of the room, slamming doors behind me. Then came the footprints. I started noticing them in the dust on the hardwood floors. Small, bare footprints, too small to be mine, leading from the hallway to the kitchen and stopping abruptly. I followed them once, up the stairs and into the attic. There, in the dust-covered floor, was a handprint. Not just any handprint. It looked like it had been pressed with pressure, as if someone had tried to climb through the ceiling into my room. I called the police once, but they were skeptical. They came, checked the house, found nothing. "Old houses do strange things," one officer said. But the unease in their voice told me they had felt something, too. One night, I stayed up, determined to catch whatever was tormenting me. I sat in the living room, flashlight in hand, ears straining. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, scratching, louder this time, coming from the fireplace. I shined my flashlight inside, and my heart stopped. At the back of the hearth, I saw a pair of eyes staring at me. Pale, wide, unblinking. Then the whisper, "Don't look away." I froze, staring back, but when I blinked, it was gone. The air smelled like blood. The next morning, I found streaks along the floor, reddish-brown smears that weren't there before. I tried staying with friends, but the house seemed to follow me. Objects I had taken with me would appear back in my room. One morning, I found my bed made perfectly, even though I hadn't touched it, and a message written in what looked like dried blood on the wall. "Stay." It wasn't until I started digging into my aunt's past that I understood the house. JH. The initials in the drawings were her younger brother. He had disappeared in 1976. Officially, he ran away, but locals whispered about the house, saying that the family had always been different, that something unnatural had been in that place. My aunt had inherited the house after his disappearance, and she had never lived there full time. I realized then that I had walked into a trap, a legacy of something older and darker than any rational explanation. The final night was the worst. I had barricaded myself in the living room, candles lit around me, praying to anything that might listen. Around midnight, the house went cold, so cold that my breath turned to mist. The whispering returned, louder, now speaking in my name. Footsteps pounded from the attic, then the ceiling, then inside the walls. The fireplace erupted, not with fire, but with shadow. A figure emerged, small, gaunt, its face twisted with rage and hunger. It was JH, or what he had become. His eyes burned, hollow and empty, and he lunged. I ran, crashing through the kitchen and out the back door into the woods behind the house. Branches tore at my skin, roots caught my feet, but I didn't stop. When I reached the main road, the headlights of a passing car were a welcome relief. I collapsed, gasping, convinced I had escaped. I returned with the police the next day, determined to prove what I had seen. The house was empty. The fireplace had no scratches, no sign of disturbance, no footprints, no blood, nothing. It was as if the horror had never existed. I moved immediately, never looked back. But sometimes at night, when I close my eyes, I see those eyes again, pale and unblinking, staring at me from the darkness. I hear the whisper, calling my name, and I know that whatever was in that house didn't stay there. I haven't told anyone most of this. People would call me insane, and maybe I am. But I know what I saw. I know what followed me out of that house, and I know that it is still out there, waiting for the next person foolish enough to enter. The experience left me hollow, haunted. Even in daylight, I catch glimpses of shadows at the edge of my vision. Objects shift when I'm not looking. The whispers follow me into my new apartment. Friends have noticed I flinch at sounds no one else hears. I wake in the middle of the night to a cold breath on my neck, and I know that those pale eyes are still there, watching, waiting. I've tried to research more about JH, but records are scarce. Local legends speak of a house in Millstone where children disappear, where something feeds on fear. I know now that my aunt's house was one of those places. The police may never have found anything, but I did, and it will never let me go. Sometimes I think the most terrifying thing isn't what you see, but what follows you unseen, what waits in the darkness just beyond perception, growing hungrier as time passes. I try to sleep, but even in my dreams, the figure returns. I hear it whispering, sometimes pleading, sometimes commanding, but always knowing my name. I've moved towns twice since Millstone, yet the feeling never leaves. Shadows seem heavier, the air thicker as if carrying the residue of that house, and every so often I find small scratches on my walls, tiny footprints in the dust as faint and barely noticeable, but unmistakably human. I don't know how much time I have before it finds a way back to me fully. I fear the day I wake to see those hollow eyes in my bedroom, staring without blinking, whispering the words I've tried to block from memory. Until then, I live with the unease, the constant sense that I'm never truly alone. If anyone reads this and thinks it's a story, I warn you, it's real. The house in Millstone is real, and whatever is tied to it is patient, intelligent, and relentless, and it doesn't forget. Story the end. It was late September when things started to go wrong in our small town of Millfield, Ohio. I had just turned 28 and was working my first real job at the shipping warehouse on the outskirts of town. Life had been a monotonous routine up until that point. Wake up, go to work, come home, eat something that could barely be called dinner, then watch TV until my eyelids burned shut. I had moved into a cheap one-bedroom apartment on Elm Street a few months earlier, not because I liked the place, but because it was affordable and the landlord didn't ask too many questions. The rent was $650 a month, which was nothing compared to the other apartments in town, most of which were over $900. The downside, I would soon learn, was that my apartment had a long and strange history that the landlord conveniently left out. It started with the noises. The first night, I was too tired to notice them at first, just faint creaks and groans from the old wooden floors. I told myself it was normal. Old buildings settle. But over the next week, the noises became more distinct. It was as if someone was walking slowly across the floor above mine, pacing, sometimes stopping right above my bedroom. I lived on the top floor. The thought that someone could be up there was impossible, or so I thought. I asked the landlord if anyone else lived above me, and he laughed. "You're the top floor. You hear things in the building sometimes. Old pipes, old floors, that's it." I nodded and tried to sleep, but that night the pacing grew louder, heavier, almost deliberate, and then I heard a whisper. I don't remember what it said, only that it sounded like a low, urgent plea. My heart thudded in my chest. I pulled the blanket over my head and prayed it would go away. It didn't. By the second week, the noises had gotten worse. Doors in my apartment would creak open on their own. Sometimes I would come home to find the bedroom door wide open when I was certain I had closed it. The refrigerator door would be slightly ajar, even though I had locked it shut. I began recording the apartment at night with my phone, hoping to capture some explanation. An animal maybe, a neighbor, something rational. I didn't find anything, at least nothing that made sense. But the next morning, the recordings would be gone. The videos I had saved would be corrupted, the files unreadable. Every single one. I started to feel paranoid. I told myself I was imagining things, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows moved in the corners of my eyes, just outside my vision. I would catch a glimpse of something, but when I turned my head, nothing was there. One night, about 2 weeks into living there, I woke up to the smell of smoke. I bolted upright, panicked, and rushed to the kitchen. Nothing. No fire, no smoke, just the faint smell lingering in the air. I opened all the windows, ran my hands through my hair, and tried to calm down. Then I heard it, the whisper again, this time right behind me. I spun around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. The whisper was barely audible. "Get out." It wasn't angry, just pleading. My rational mind told me it had to be a dream, but the smell of smoke had been real. I couldn't explain that. I barely slept that night. By the third week, things escalated. It started small. A drawer in my kitchen opened when I hadn't touched it. A picture frame tipped slightly on the wall. Then I found it. Scratches on my bedroom floor. Deep gouges that hadn't been there before. They led from the corner of the room to the center, then back again like something had been pacing. I took pictures and showed a coworker, Mike, who lived in town all his life. He turned pale. "Man, that's not normal," he said. "You sure you don't have mice or something?" I nodded, but I knew it wasn't mice. I could hear the pacing too, sometimes in rhythm with the scratches. It felt intelligent, deliberate, almost like it was counting. I tried to brush it off, but that night the whisper came again, louder this time, more urgent. "Leave now." I started researching the building's history. This is when I found out something that made my stomach turn. The building had been an old boarding house in the 1960s. Several people had died there under mysterious circumstances. One woman supposedly jumped from the roof, claiming she was being followed. Another man was found in his apartment, beaten to death, but no suspects were ever identified. The landlord conveniently left out these details, or maybe he didn't even know. Either way, it clicked. Something in that building wasn't right. I told myself I had to leave, but my paycheck depended on being close to work. I convinced myself I could deal with it, that it wasn't real, that it was stress and paranoia. I was lying to myself. I knew it. The first physical attack happened on a Thursday night. I was in bed, phone in hand, trying to distract myself by scrolling through social media. I felt something cold brush against my arm. I thought it was my cat, but my cat had been missing for hours. Then I felt it again, stronger, almost gripping my wrist. I yelped and turned on the bedside lamp. Nothing. But the cold lingered. I pulled the blanket over me, shaking. Then I heard a voice, distinct and menacing this time. "You're mine." I bolted out of bed, ran to the door, tried to leave, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. I could hear heavy breathing in the apartment, even though I was alone. I called 911, but the operator couldn't trace any intruder. When the police came, nothing was there. No signs of forced entry, nothing. They suggested I stay elsewhere for the night. I did. I slept at Mike's place. The next morning, I went back to my apartment. Everything looked normal. Too normal. That's when I noticed the scratches again. Only this time, they spelled something. I couldn't believe it at first. At first, it looked like random gouges, but then I saw the pattern. The scratches spelled my name, letter by letter, carved into the wood of the floor. My pulse hit 180. I called the landlord, demanded he give me a refund for breaking my lease, and left immediately. He shrugged and said, "You're imagining things." I didn't argue. I just left. I stayed with Mike for a few nights, trying to calm down. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. But it didn't. I started getting messages on my phone. I had no notifications, no texts, no emails, but the messages appeared anyway. They were short, direct. "I see you. You can't hide. Come back." The last one was especially chilling because it came with a picture, my apartment, taken from inside. I didn't know how anyone could have taken it, but it was there. I started sleeping in shifts, lights on, doors locked, windows taped shut. Nothing worked. The messages kept coming. One night, Mike convinced me to call in a private investigator. He said maybe someone was stalking me, someone dangerous. The investigator, a guy named Roy, arrived the next morning. He was a grizzled man, late 50s, who had a reputation for handling weird cases. I told him everything. He listened carefully, took notes, and asked to see the apartment. I hesitated, but I knew I had to. Roy walked through the place, inspecting every corner, every floorboard, every wall. He didn't say much, but his face grew pale. "This isn't just a person," he said finally. "Something else is here, something tied to the building. I've seen a few cases like this before. Never anything this intense." I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer directly. "Stay somewhere else for a while. Don't come back until I say it's safe." That night, I stayed at a cheap motel on the edge of town. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. Around 2 a.m., my phone lit up with a message. I froze. It was a picture of me sleeping in the motel room. I jumped up, checked the door and windows. Everything was locked. I called Mike. He came over immediately. We searched every inch of the room. Nothing. But the message stayed on my phone. It didn't come from any number. It didn't have metadata, nothing. Just the picture. My reflection, captured while I slept. The next day, Roy told me something that made my stomach drop. "There's a way to stop this," he said. "But it's not going to be easy. Whatever this is, it feeds on fear, on attention. You've been reacting. That's why it's escalating. To survive, you have to cut it off entirely. No contact, no fear, no acknowledgement. You have to disappear from it entirely. It's not human, and normal methods won't work." I asked him what he meant by disappear. He avoided the question. "I'll help you, but you need to trust me." That night, he took me to an abandoned property outside of town. An old warehouse surrounded by woods, no neighbors for miles. He told me to stay there off the grid. No phone, no internet, no contact with anyone. I reluctantly agreed. The first week was quiet. I slept, ate, and stayed put. But then it started again. Small things. Shadows moving in the corner of the warehouse, whispering voices carried by the wind. Items I left on the floor would be moved in the morning. It was testing me, trying to get a reaction. I refused to react. I stayed calm, kept my mind occupied with reading and exercise. I told myself this was the only way to survive. Weeks passed. I became a shell of myself. My hair grew long, my face pale, my body thin. The whispers were constant, sometimes in the day, sometimes at night, always faint, always insistent. Then, one evening, I saw something I will never forget. In the corner of the warehouse, a figure appeared. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Its limbs were elongated, its eyes hollow black pits, and its mouth stretched in a permanent silent scream. It didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. I didn't scream, I didn't run, I didn't blink. I remembered Roy's words, "Do not react." It stayed there for what felt like hours, then slowly faded away. I realized then that it had been waiting for me to panic, to acknowledge it as real. I didn't. I survived the night. Months passed. I stayed in hiding, completely isolated, moving only when necessary, always careful not to draw attention. I learned to live in silence, to ignore the world. The messages stopped, the whispers faded, the scratches disappeared. I never returned to Millfield, never saw my apartment again. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to. All I know is that it's still out there, somewhere, feeding on the fear of people who notice it, who react, who believe it can be confronted. Sometimes when I'm alone at night in my new apartment, I hear the faintest whisper in the darkness. Just one word, soon. I don't look. I don't respond. I just sit in the darkness, pretending it isn't real. Because the moment I acknowledge it, I know it will be back, stronger than ever. I don't live anymore. I just hide. And I know deep down that I will never be free. Story the end.